What, the picture?
Yeah.
Let's hope it records clear. So we get to go back in again. We've had a number of breaks, unfortunately, due to funerals in our class schedule, but and we're going to have 3 more breaks. The next 3 weeks, I will be on vacation. So we need to make the most of today.
I'll see you in September then.
You're in July, you're gone? Okay. Escaping the heat?
I thought rabbis get a month off every year.
It depends on what time we take it. We get a certain amount of time, and then we arrange with the congregation of when we are off. Okay. Down to work, because we got a new book, Bamidbar, a new book of the Torah. But before we get into this, I want to do a quick test of Jewish life cycle events. All right? So, Jewish life cycle events. As I mentioned a moment ago, the last life cycle event that we all experience is a funeral. Walk me back somewhere between. These are the new pens you just got. Oh, they're a little. Maybe they just need to warm up a little bit. All right. So back from birth to death, right? Funeral is an actual life cycle ceremony event. There is set liturgy and elements to it. Somewhere before the funeral, other stuff happens.
Birth.
All right. Well, we got birth down here, but we got wedding, right? Let's call them by the ceremony, not the. There we go. Now the pen's warming.
Birthdays?
All right. So we got a wedding. A wedding has liturgy. It has a particular ceremony to it. There are things that are changing in your life at it. Very good. Okay, so if it's a boy,
Or bat or bar mitzvah?
we have a brit milah, right, which is 8 days after the birth, or we have a simchat bat, which can be any time after the birth, which is a celebration of a daughter. And I heard bar and bat mitzvah.
Graduations?
Well, exactly. So I'm trying to limit it to life cycle events that have set liturgy or ritual that is embedded within Judaism. We've certainly adopted many other events in our life, like graduation, learning how to drive, first time voting, all sorts of other things. But there's no special Jewish ritual or liturgy for those events.
Is there for confirmation?
There are services that are often done, but it is not embedded within Jewish tradition. It's something that's been added. It's a very nice idea to add. Same thing with consecration for the beginning of a child's Jewish education, or Kabbalat Sidur, another ceremony where a child gets a Sidur for the first time. But those are kind of, you're not going to find them written in classical texts as this is the way you do it. But we're missing one. And that was kind of what I expected. What's that? Don't tell you? Well, you should know. Not as a life cycle event.
Opinion event.
There we are. 8 days. And a total of 30 days.
We never had.
Pidyon Ben.
He's a Kohen.
He's your Kohen, so he better know this. What is a Pidyon Haben? The redemption of the firstborn. You buy the baby back.
But only if it's a boy, I thought.
But only if it's a
And
boy.
If firstborn, torn from the womb.
Torn is perhaps if it is what opened the womb. Opened the womb, right? So.
I mean, if a woman has a miscarriage in her first pregnancy, and then she has a boy the second time, there's no figure.
Right. So the circumstances are very, very precise, which may be why this didn't leap to mind for everyone, because everyone is going to have a brit milah or a simchat bat, just about, even if in the Orthodox world there was still a special aliyah for the father when he has a daughter born. Everyone is going to have a bar or bat mitzvah in the sense that they will become bar or bat mitzvah. We hope most people get married, and of course we know this one is inevitable for all of us. But Pidyon Ben is a very narrow set of circumstances of what qualifies as meeting this redemption of the firstborn. It has to be the firstborn of the mother. It has to be the firstborn male. It has to be the firstborn through the natural birth canal, so cesarean does not count. Correct. And as Edie pointed out, it also has to be the firstborn not following a previous miscarriage if the miscarriage came at a latter point during the pregnancy, not earlier, but only later. So there are a lot of ways that you get disqualified from needing to do this ceremony. And if you do need to do this ceremony, Mr. Cohen, what happens? Have you ever done the ceremony?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times. I'm trying to remember. There's a ritual and a liturgy that goes with it. There's like a contract
Right.
thing that the parent says.
Exactly. And the 5 silver coins used in exchange.
We all got 30.
What's that?
We all got 30.
30?
silver.
Wow, maybe
30
inflation.
30 silver coins.
Well, maybe it's always either one coin, but it may be worth more.
It might have been the value total.
He got silver dollars from my brother.
Mhm.
30.
Maybe it was just the markup. You don't want to pay retail.
Yeah, well,
They
you know,
usually
we
do
were
it
in
around the
retail,
table.
so,
Right.
Right.
I remember we carried an Avian on a silver tray.
Nice. Very nice. So why in the world are we doing this? All right, so we all have a sort of vague idea that we have this ritual. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, it's very significant and a beautiful liturgy because of Hannah. Oh, I mean the dedication of Samuel, her son?
Right,
No,
okay, I thought that was the origin.
nope. The origin is in this week's Torah portion. We get more details later, but the origin in particular is being mentioned in this week's Torah portion. So we're not going to get into all of the details of who qualifies or doesn't qualify, but we are going to get the basic thematic underpinning in this Torah portion. So brace yourself. We are on page 781, and this is chapter 3 of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, and we're going to start with verse 40, which is at the bottom of page 781. And both for the benefit of review as well as for the benefit of what we're about to discuss, the bulk of the book of Bamidbar coming before this, it deals with numbers. There's a reason why in English we call this the book of Numbers, because the first chunk of this parasha deals with the number of people in every tribe. It's the census. So we find out how many people are in each of the tribe and what the total number of the children of Israel are, and also what the numbers of the different tribes of Levi are. So that's what we've been talking and counting for most of the earlier section of the Torah portion. So it should then not come as a surprise that we're still counting when we start on verse 40. But now we're counting a special category. Everyone with me? Okay, I need a volunteer, because I hate to interrupt myself.
Okay, read where?
From verse 40, bottom of 781. The Lord said,
Right here,
Mhm.
okay. The Lord said to Moses, record every firstborn male of the Israelite people from the age of 1 month up, and make a list of their names.
all right, pause there. So what did we just learn?
1 month.
1 month up. That's why we wait till 30 days. The significance of 30 days?
Make sure they're viable.
Viability. Right? This is a very practical measure, which is to say that infant mortality, especially within the first 30 days in the ancient world, was high, very high. So if a child lived past 30 days, they had a good shot. But before 30 days, don't get too attached, because and don't do it too attached is a bit tongue-in-cheek of a very dark subject. Of course, every parent was attached to every child, but every parent expected to bury at least one child in their lifetime.
What?
In the ancient world,
Oh,
infant mortality
Okay.
was so high that every parent would expect to bury a child, at least one, in their lifetime, whether it be during the 30-day period, whether it be when they were an infant or a small child, whether it be when they were an adult, but still before the parent passed. the idea that parents would almost always predecease their children, that's a very modern thing. In the ancient world, most parents would have at least one child pass during their lifetime. I know, and it's
That's devastating.
of course, of course. So the 30 days is a very important cultural side of what life was like for our ancestors, and something that we should give thanks that we live in a day and age when this has become such a rarity that it almost doesn't even make sense.
Okay.
Onward.
And take the Levites for me, the Lord, in place of every firstborn among the Israelites. People in the cattle of the Levites, in the place of every firstborn among the cattle of Israelites.
All right, wait. What are we doing? Take for me the firstborn, take for me the Levites in the place of every firstborn among the Israelites. So we're counting all of the firstborn, but we're really going to count the Levites instead. And the cattle of the firstborn is going to be replaced by the cattle of the Levite.
I was confused. I thought, I was like, I don't know how to read.
Yeah, no, it's a clunky sentence in English. It's a little bit smoother in Hebrew. But what's going on? What's the idea here? Why the Levites? Why are the Levites becoming the replacement for the firstborns? So you have to remember the word Levite means more than the guy who invented jeans. Who are the Levites?
Those who are not the priests are Levites.
No.
Wait a second, they're one of the tribes.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are one of the tribes,
I knew that.
but there's something special about that tribe.
The Judah tribe?
Nope, no, the Levites are special because they do not receive land in the coming settlement of Israel. Levites don't get a land. They get a few city things here and there, but they don't get land. What is their job?
Serve the priests.
To serve. They are the priests. Every Kohen is also a Levite.
So do they live in the temple? Do they sleep in the
They don't live in the temple. They live in the cities and the towns, but they are dependent upon the rest of the nation.
To take care of them. Okay.
Well, to provide. That's what much of the tithing system is for, right? So Levi, the tribe that is named for Levi the guy, has a subgroup in it that are from Aaron's sons. And those are the people we call the Kohens. So when we say Levite, in many places in the Torah, what we are talking about is the broader priestly class, not necessarily the guys at the altar, all of them, but we're talking about this broader group that have a spiritual duty for the whole community, including the Kohens. And indeed, the Kohanic side of this is going to become more important. You'll see when we wrestle with the Midrash. But the Levites are now then becoming, instead of everyone else's, firstborn. Right? So every firstborn kid in every family of Judah, every firstborn, or boy, I should say, boy in the family of Issachar, every firstborn boy in every family of Dan, they are all being replaced by the Levites. Replaced from what? What's the substitution happening here? And what about the cattle? What are we talking about? Now you know why there's a midrash about this. Now you know why we need rabbinic explanation. Because what looks like a very plain and boring sentence, a little clunky, but pretty boring, is revealing something very, very significant. But I'm not going to give away the surprise yet. Going to have to hold on a little bit longer until we get a little more text under our belt.
So Moses recorded all the firstborn among the Israelites, as the Lord had commanded him. All the firstborn male, as listed by name, recorded from the age of 1 month up, and came to 22,273.
Which is also what you need to get the nomination, right? 22,273. 22,273 firstborn among all the rest of the Israelites. If you look back, at the line right before we started, verse 39, you'll see that the number of Levites was 22,000 even. There are 22,000 Levites. There are 22,273 firstborn.
That is the total number of the Levites.
And that's the total number of firstborn kids from the families of the rest of Israel, of all the other tribes. Okay? But remember, we are taking the Levites instead of the firstborn. I got a problem. If you're taking the Levites instead of the firstborn, if we are substituting one for the other, what do you do about the extra?
That's a question.
We got leftover. We got no Levite to take those 273 places.
Substitute cattle.
Not quite. Not quite. Keep reading.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the Levite in place of all the firstborn among the Israelite people, and the cattle of the Levites in place of their cattle, and the Levites shall be mine, the Lord's.
Which should set off a little bit of an alarm bell, which is, I thought we were all God's people. So are some people more God's people than others people? And the answer is yes, in a certain sense, in the sense of having a particular duty and circumstances and calling. So they're going to be, I'm just going to abbreviate it with mine, which we're going to come back to of what that means in more detail. But that is in general. However,
and as the redemption price of the 273 Israelites firstborn over above the number of the Levites.
Right, remember that's our problem number.
Take 5 shekels per head. Take this by the sanctuary weight, 20 gerals or gerals? Gerahs to the shekel, and give the money to Aaron and his sons as the redemption price for those who are in excess. So Moses took the redemption money from those over and above the ones redeemed by the Levites. He took the money from the firstborn of the Israelite, 1,365 sanctuary shekels.
Which is 273 times 5. So they did the math right. Yay.
And Moses gave the redemption money to Aaron and his sons at the Lord's abiding as the Lord had commanded Moses.
Okay. So that's where we get our 5 coins in the modern ceremony, because that is compensating for the additional 273 that didn't have a one-to-one Levite to take their place. But we still don't understand what place they're being replaced for. Who's doing what for me that I needed someone to replace me in the first place? And why would I pay if I don't have a substitute on my behalf?
Age of 50.
Up. Nope. Now we're down to Midrash.
Oh, okay.
Now we get to an explanation. Well, I hope. It is an explanation, but I'm sure it will be one that will engender much conversation. As any good explanation should. Any explanation that leaves you with no new questions wasn't a good explanation. It was just something to shut you up. All right, so this is all one explanation, both sides of the page, taken from Midrash Rabbah, Bamidbar Rabbah, and I even had to eliminate a few parts that were slight tangents. I recommend going back and reading the whole thing, but let's do what we can with what we got.
Our rabbis have said, why did the Holy One, blessed be he, order the firstborn Israelite to be redeemed by the means of the Levites?
All right, so first thing that's been introduced here is this idea of redemption, pidyon haben, it's on my list of redeeming the firstborn, that redemption is being somehow engendered by our Levite substitutes, right? That this isn't just these guys in place of those guys. There's a redemptive act taking place by this Levite substitution. So now we got to uncover what that redemption is. And that's going to be a long story. So hold on. We're going through most of human history here.
Before the tabernacle was erected, the high place where permitted and the sacrificial service was performed by the firstborn.
Dun, dun, dun. All right, go ahead and read the next sentence.
From the moment when the tabernacle was erected, the high place was forbidden, and the service was confined to the priest.
Okay. Let's make sure we all fully digest what we just read.
And that was confusing.
Right? So according to the rabbis, and this is based, and we covered this in a few other classes years ago, prior to the erection of the Mishkan, before it was put up, you could offer a sacrifice anywhere. And if you've read the Bible, you'll know that you had Abraham and Isaac and Jacob walking around sacrificing left, right, and center. Right? Oh, I'm in a new place. God did something great for me. I'm going to make an altar here and make a sacrifice. Right? Everyone remembers that whole idea. After the tabernacle was built, only at the Mishkan could you do a sacrifice. However, what they've introduced in this part that we haven't talked about before is that prior to the establishment of the Kohanim, that subgroup of the Levites, it was the firstborn of each family that had the responsibility and the privilege and the duty of officiating at the sacrifices. Right? So you had your own priest built into your family through this firstborn. Everyone's okay with that? And then once the tabernacle was built, they're out of a job. They're no longer doing it. It's now the Levites, in particular that subgroup of the Kohanes, that are doing the job instead.
So originally it could have been Israelites or Levites.
Yep, it would have been. So the firstborn male of a family in the tribe of Judah would have the obligation for his family of doing sacrifices wherever the family felt like it. Once the tabernacle was up, you don't get to do it anywhere else, and he doesn't get to do it anymore.
Is there any significance to high places that have to be hilltop?
It was customary. It wasn't required, but throughout the ancient world, elevated places, the Ramot were always being used, and to this day we still use a bima for our service. We still use a high place in our service.
I found this more defense.
That is true. That is true. Okay, onward.
There is proof that the firstborn offered the sacrifices before the tribe of Levi took office.
Just in case you're doubting this idea.
Go back to the beginning of the creation of the world.
Told you this was a long story.
Adam was the world's firstborn.
Think about it.
That's true.
He was the firstborn of firstborns. So Adam would have been the first person to offer sacrifices. And as it says, in fact.
When he offered his sacrifice, as it says, and it pleased the Lord better than a bullock that has horns and hoofs. Psalms 59, verse 32. He donned high priestly skins and clothed them. Genesis.
Oh, you skipped a line. He donned high priestly garments.
Oh, garments, sorry. As it says, and the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins and clothed them.
All right.
Genesis chapter 3, verse 21.
So if God's making clothes for you, this is not just off the rack. This is not just something you picked up at Target. These would have been the most superlative garments imaginable, and the most superlative garments imaginable were the garments of the priests. Right? That we just finished when we read the book of Exodus, describing in great detail all of the beautiful things that the priests would have worn. So, therefore, Adam, as the world's firstborn, and therefore as the world's first priest, and as someone who had tailor-made clothes made for him, would have worn these divinely created garments that signified his status as the firstborn.
Wow.
Okay? That's where the Midrash is going with this. Don't worry, we're going to get to the metaphorical as well, but right now let's handle it on the surface level. Onward.
They were robes of honor, which subsequent firstborn used. And when Adam died, he passed them to Seth.
Both Cain and Abel having problems.
Seth passed them to
Methuselah.
And when Methuselah died, he passed them to Noah. Wow. Noah arose, offered a sacrifice, as it says, and he took off every clean beast and offered burnt offering on the altar.
So we have a very clear statement about Noah being the one who did an offering.
Genesis,
So just a second, just a second. Yeah, that's in the book of Genesis. So up to this point, we have a very clear pattern. And if you go through the biblical lineage, it makes a lot of sense. Right? You had the firstborn after the Cain and Abel fiasco, which was Seth, and Seth gets the garments, and then Seth gives them to Methuselah. Methuselah gives them to Noah. Firstborn after firstborn after firstborn, passing down very nicely. So far, so good.
very deep.
Very deep. Well, we'll wait for the depth until we get to when it changes. Onward.
Okay. Noah died and passed them to Shem. But was Shem a firstborn?
You have to say that with incredulity. Was Shem a firstborn?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. You broke the pattern. Because what do we know? Keep reading.
Japheth,
Or Yaphet in modern in Hebrew, but
okay, Japheth, surely was the firstborn, as it says, Shem, the brother of Japheth, the elder.
right. So
Genesis 10:21.
we know from the Bible that Shem wasn't the elder. And yet you just told me that Noah gave the special clothes that God had made for Adam to Shem. What happened? Keep reading.
Why then did he hand them on to Shem? Because Noah first foresaw that the line of the I can't say that word.
Patriarchs.
Patriarchs.
You know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Would issue from him. Shem died and handed it on to Abraham.
Okay, so we now go from Noah to Shem, who wasn't really the firstborn, but Noah, being a prophet, could see that the patriarchs would come from Shem, so better the robe should go to Shem than anyone else, even though he wasn't really the firstborn. And then on to Abraham.
but was Abraham a firstborn? In fact, is that because he was a righteous man to the birthright and was transferred to him, and he offered a sacrifice?
Okay, so was Abraham the firstborn? No, we know he wasn't from the genealogy, but he was righteous, and he was so righteous that the implied birthright that should have gone to the firstborn was transferred to him instead. So he got the special robes, and he got to do the sacrificial things, and he took over this role. All right, so what's happening here? What radical idea has been introduced for our last two generations?
The firstborn does not necessarily get started with Seth.
Yeah, the firstborns.
All the way down, it was the righteous, hopefully the firstborn.
So we start off with this very clear notion that birth order matters, right? And with birth order comes certain duties and privileges and responsibilities and honors and all of that. But we've now introduced this notion of, well, but who's the right person? Actually, let's replace the word right with a better word, merit. We started off with this notion that birth was what was important. But for the last two generations at least, and Seth is also a bit of a question mark, merit seems to be the definitive answer. That, yeah, the birth order should have been someone else, but this guy was so much better than the other that it was just no contest. And so it skipped a little bit and went to that guy instead. And we're going to see that some more.
But who made that decision?
The father.
Well, look at the text. Who does it say made the decision? How did Noah make that decision to give it to Shem rather than Yaphet?
He didn't make the decision.
He foresaw. How did he foresee? He just really good at picking lottery numbers? I mean,
He had instinct. God spoke to him in his dream.
he had divine insight, right? So
Spiritual discernment.
it was clear to him from God that it was better to go to Shem because of the future that awaited the descendants of Shem through the patriarch of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So would you say Noah made that decision, or would you say God made that decision?
God. Because God, it is, there's a saying that whatever is written in your heart the law that's written in your heart, God will put.
To some extent, yes, but it's yes. So we can say that God did it because without God's insight, Noah wouldn't have come to that conclusion. Or we could say Noah did it because he still had to be the one to come to that conclusion. And that ambivalence is important, of trying to understand what does God want, because God has told me that I should follow the birth order, but God has also told me that I should reward merit and make sure that the primary role of serving God is defended by those most meritorious. How do I serve both of these simultaneously? Sometimes it's easy, Noah, firstborn, gets the robes, he's off, no problem. Clearly also had the merit. Sometimes it's not so easy. And with Shem and with Abraham, it seems that it was recognized by the family or the natural order of things, if we'll make it more vague, that they were the best choice despite their handicap of not being firstborn. But we're going to keep pushing on because we got a much more famous case coming up. Oh, by the way, Isaac is not mentioned because Isaac was the firstborn. There was no issue there because remember, as I said, it's the firstborn of the mother that matters, not the firstborn of the father. So keep going.
Abraham died and handed it on to Isaac. Isaac arose and handed it on to Jacob. But was Jacob a firstborn?
Famously not.
No. But you find that Jacob prudently took it from Esau. Do you suppose perhaps that it was for no good reason that Jacob asked Esau to sell him the birthright? No. Jacob wished to offer sacrifice and could not, because he was not the firstborn.
All right, so now rather than saying he was selling or buying the birthright with the soup because he was just tricking Esau or because he wanted an inheritance or something, now why is Jacob getting the birthright?
Because he had to do the sacrifice.
He wants to do the sacrifices. He wants to serve God through this way.
That totally turns the concept that we have around.
Correct. And what have we introduced where the decision previously was being made on behalf of the firstborns by God/parents? What's been introduced now?
The merit.
Well, who's making the choice? Who's making the choice between Jacob and Esau here?
Jacob is.
Esau is selling his
Oh, yeah,
birthright.
Jacob and Esau themselves,
Yeah.
right? The right is not being decided per se by merit, although we certainly believe the more meritorious brother ended up with it. The right is being decided not by birth, because the birth brother disparages what is being offered by having this birthright. It's being decided by discussion between these two brothers. And the one who wants it more and the one who wants it least come to an agreement, so that the one who wants it more ends up with it, and the one who wants it least gets some soup. That's what it was worth. How are we doing here? Can we think for a moment about what that says about Esau? That he was born into a position where he would be allowed to officiate at sacrifices on behalf of God, this lineage that goes all the way back to the creation of the world, and he was willing to give it up for soup.
Maybe he didn't want the responsibility.
Maybe not. Or
he was
maybe
just humble.
or maybe it was less important to him than soup. Oh, if he was just humble or didn't want the responsibility, he would have given it away. But he sold it for something he wanted.
Oh,
Yeah, he wanted something.
money.
No,
Not money,
He
food.
was starving.
he wanted food.
He was hungry. You never had a kid say, "I'm starving," and you know they had a perfectly fine lunch. Right? So he came in hungry from a day's hunt without having caught anything. That's not my definition of starving. Come back after a week of not having caught anything. Now you're starving. So he was impetuous. He valued what he had here and now in front of him. He didn't value what it meant to serve God, especially what it would mean to do a sacrifice, especially what it would cost to do sacrifices. You would be often the one putting up the cow for the sacrifice. So it would be coming out of your pocket quite often. Jacob valued it. He was willing to make the sacrifice, to be the one to do the sacrifice. And so he showed himself more meritorious, but he made his own deal to earn it.
Wasn't it the mother who urged that?
Later, when Isaac is near his deathbed, and he wants to give a blessing, which is different than birthright,
Right.
that is where Rivka convinces Jacob to pretend to be the brother in order to receive the blessing. But the blessing and birthright are two different things.
That really.
I know. I rubbed you the wrong way. I know.
It really does.
I know. And there's a lot to be said about that the next time we go over Genesis. Okay. Onward.
Henceforth, Jacob, having taken the birthright, began to offer sacrifices. As it says, and God said unto Jacob, arise and go up to Bethel and dwell there and make there an altar unto God, etc. Genesis 35, verse 1.
Right. So Jacob went ahead and he became the sacrificer guy. That was fine. Onward.
Similarly, when Moses had sacrifices offered at Sinai, it was the firstborn who offered them.
Now notice we've made a difference here. Prior to this, we've done only the firstborn of the firstborn of the firstborn of the firstborn. But firstborn technically is the firstborn of the mother, which means you can have multiple firstborns in one generation. It's simply, as we've talked about before, up until this point, most of the other kids in the same generation didn't work out so well, right? Abraham's brothers didn't work out so well, and so we assume that their children didn't work out so well. Ishmael didn't work out so well, so we assume his kids didn't work out so well. Esau didn't work out so well, so we assume his kids didn't work out so well. Only now when we get to Jacob's kids, where we get the 12 tribes, they have trouble, but they work out well enough that they stick together. So now we're getting the firstborn of all of these kids. It's not just through one line of the firstborns, it's the firstborn in every family in Dan, the firstborn in every family of God, the firstborn in every family of every tribe. And that's what we're talking about here during Moses' day. So they would have now had a long time, a couple hundred years maybe, of doing the whole firstborn sacrifice thing as being the normal way that the firstborn served their family. Onward.
Similarly, when Moses had sacrificed, similarly, I thought I was off. Similarly, when Moses had sacrifices offered at Sinai, it was the firstborn who offered them. As it says, and he sent the young men of the children of Israel, who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings. Exodus 24, verse 5. What this means of the young men.
What is the meaning of young men?
I'm sorry, what is the meaning of the young men? The youths among the firstborn who offered burnt offerings. From here you learn that no man offered sacrifices except the firstborn.
All right, so the firstborn were the ones who did the sacrifices. We know that it was a wider pool of people who were sacrificing before the Kohanim from that verse in Exodus. And it's important also to add, just as though the Kohens were the only ones who offered sacrifices after this fact, other people would bring sacrifices to have them offered. Right, so if I was bringing a sin offering, I would bring it to the Mishkan, but the Kohen would be the one who did the actual sacrificing. So too, they're talking about here. So they're serving just like priests. So if someone who wasn't the firstborn wanted to make a sacrifice, they would bring the animal, but it would only be the hands of the firstborn that did the actual slaughtering. Good? Yes? Maybe? All right. But we got to figure out still, remember our first question, why are the Levites doing this now instead of the firstborn, since the system had sort of worked itself out, right? We went through this whole period where it was just by birth, then it went over to merit, and then they were sort of figuring it out on their own, and now we're back to, it seems that on average, the average firstborn is doing a good job throughout the entire nation. Why not just keep it that way? And that's what we're on the back page for.
When Israel committed that nameable act, they said, let the firstborn come and offer sacrifice to it. As it says, and they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings Exodus 32, verse 6.
All right, so despite it being called the unnameable act, we're going to have to name it. What are we talking about here in Exodus 32? The golden calf. Did you ever stop and ask who was offering the sacrifices to the golden calf? Because what do we know about these guys during the golden calf incident, about the Levites? They didn't join in.
Oh.
Right? Very famously, the Levites, as we're going to see, didn't join in during the golden calf episode. So someone else must have thought they could do sacrifices. It would have been the people who were used to doing sacrifices, the firstborn of the families. So the firstborns of all the families were the ones who said, hey, we got a golden calf, yay, let's go make an offering to it. Here, I'll just do what I've been doing, and we'll just do it for this calf on behalf of my family.
Didn't Aaron participate in that
He
to
did,
a
but didn't.
degree?
To a degree, we've talked about poor Aaron before and how he got roped into all of this. He participated more in the creation of the calf and trying to moderate the mob. But yeah, he had mixed results, we might say. Yeah, we've talked about poor Aaron and his record on this. Okay, so now we're beginning to get an inkling of what happened to the firstborn's rights. Okay, keep going.
God said to them, I have given promotion to the firstborn, having made them great in the world, and they have renounced me, and have risen and offered sacrifice before the golden calf. Behold, I shall dismiss the firstborn and enroll the sons of Levi. Therefore the Holy One, blessed be he, told Moses to number them.
That means have a census.
As it says that God dismissed the first.
As it says, number the children.
Sorry. As it says, the number of the children of Levi.
That's
Leviticus.
that's actually in Numbers where we are now.
Okay, chapter 3:15 said, "Are Judah the Levite who suggested to you that God dismissed the firstborn from the sacrificial duties and enroll the sons of Levi? Because it says, take the Levites instead of whom? Instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel and the cattle of Levites instead of their cattle. And the Levites shall be mine. I am the Lord."
Okay. So what happened?
He dismissed the firstborn and put the Levites in charge.
Okay, so the firstborn no longer get this role because of the golden calf. They were complicit. They were the ones who offered the actual sacrifices. And even though the vast majority of people escaped punishment during the golden calf incident, only the most ardent ringleaders and devotees were punished, they lost their privileges of being in charge of the sacrifices. Instead, God replaced them. God replaced them. And that explains, says the Midrash, this really weird sentence of take the Levites instead of the firstborn. That the Levites will be dedicated to me. They are mine, meaning they will do my service, instead of the firstborn who used to be doing my service. We're making a new arrangement here. What do we think? Make sense? Plausible? Sit reasonably well in the kishkas?
That's why the numbers are so important.
And that's why the numbers are so important. And Malika, I would kiss you if Neil wouldn't be upset, because that gives me the link to our next paragraph. Because what are we left with in still being ambiguous? We're still left with this 273 5-shekel payoff, and we're also left with the cows, right? So I understand now, take the Levites instead of the firstborn. But why am I taking the Levites' cows? What does this have to do with anything? And that's where we're gonna go deep in just a second. But I want to make sure we got the basic pattern here, which was we started off with birth, we shifted occasionally to merit, and then we were sort of back to birth because merit wasn't a problem. They were doing an okay job. And then merit became such a problem because of the golden calf that we basically said birth order and the merit of the firstborn no longer mattered. We're going to draw from a different pool altogether. And we're going to draw from a pool that becomes self-regulating. That is to say, within the line of Levites, the most meritorious at least ideally, that got corrupted by later kings, but ideally, the most meritorious of the Levites and the Kohanes would be the ones involved with the temple service hands-on, so that we could ensure a set group from among whom we could take the most meritorious. So it kind of does two birds with one stone. It takes it out of random family order, it puts it into a pool that gives us a big enough birth pool that it's comparable to the number of firstborn. So we're not going to be down, we're not going to be short manpower, but it still allows us room for merit by ensuring that the best of that group are the ones who do the most important work. And the other people, they can carry stuff, as we'll talk about in other parts of the Tanakh.
It wasn't the sons of Aaron who were the.
They were the officiants in terms of the actual slaughter. But when it came time for much of the preparation of the temple or the Mishkan, and the singing in the Mishkan, and the organization and the protection and all of the other duties, that was the general Levite's responsibility. Okay, good. Let's see if we can take care now, however, of the 273 extra and the extra cows and what's going on here for the final paragraph.
Our rabbi said, "To what may this be compared?
Parable alert, parable alert.
To the baker of a province who committed some fraud. The king got to know and said to the governor of his province, 'Dismiss him and appoint another in his place.'"
All right, so we see the parallel so far. All right, you got a banker, someone you've entrusted something with, and the banker's committing fraud. So the king says, get him out, put someone else in his place. Straight swap over. So far, so good. We haven't learned anything new, but it gives us a good image.
Now that banker was found to be liable for certain proceeds. So the king said, let the one who succeeds him refund on his account what he owes. So the firstborn.
All right, so this is the complicated part.
Okay.
And this is the part where we might go, well, that wouldn't happen nowadays. But work with the parable. The king says, you're the new banker, and I expect you to make good on all of the fraud your predecessor committed.
To make it up, yeah.
You have to balance the books and make up for the fraud that other guy committed. That's your responsibility. If you are the new banker of the kingdom of Israel, it's not just enough to say, hey, that guy who came before me, he was a real crook and swindler and disappeared with the pension. You have to find a way to pay the pension. You have to find a way to settle the accounts. You have to find a way to fix all the missing elements that were done.
Doesn't that put an unfair burden on them?
Absolutely. It puts a burden. Unfair? Well, that's the question. Is it an unfair burden to expect the person who is taking over to rectify the previous errors? In modern secular life, absolutely. We say that's unfair. If somebody is the CEO of a company and runs off with $100 million to the Bahamas, the next CEO elected by the board doesn't have to find magically $100 million to fix the accounts.
I always thought they did. Like if someone were to rob the bank and the bank lost all that money, I always thought you had to try to refund the money back in, try to make sure that the company doesn't go under.
So banks have insurance.
America and stuff.
Right, banks have insurance that helps protect them in the case of corruption or robbery.
Okay.
Right, that's that whole FDIC and all of that stuff. So, but other companies don't have usually that form of protection. That's why you'll always know when you ever read the fine print about buying stock or bonds or stuff, it says, not insured. There is always the risk you can lose, the principal and capital and all of that stuff is warning you that if something goes wrong, up to and including corruption or theft, you're out of luck. And the next guy coming in who picks up the pieces is not going to be able to get your piece back to you. God is saying he expects better of the replacements.
Now,
they will have to fix the gap.
Now, I have a question in this story. When the king appointed another banker to refund the money back in, how long did the king give him?
Okay, well, what was lost, right? And not in the story, but in the real parable.
It takes a long time to put money back in.
But what was
It's not
lost?
money, it's
Well,
capital.
yeah.
Right?
counts, yeah.
So what was lost when the firstborn did wrong that the Levites now have to restore?
The sacrifices.
The sacrifices physically and emotionally and spiritually, the trust, right? The trust and the connection between the people and God. Right? That was what was breached. That was what was stolen from the vault. Right? So well, that's the fun with parables, is you have to go back and forth between the literal and what it's trying to teach. So the Levites are being asked not to necessarily refund the material, although they do. Hence the cattle, that they are going to have to pony up materially to cover the breach for their brothers and sisters who did the golden calf. And what is the biggest form of their sacrifice on behalf of fixing this hole? They get nothing in Israel. They sacrifice basically their whole material future to fill the gap right then and there. They are paying from their future to fix the debt of the past for their present. And they are saying, okay, we're not going to get anything we get to Israel. We're going to put our own cows on the block now and use them as part of our sacrificial service until we get the whole system working properly again. And we are going to fix this problem between the people of Israel and God. And we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. Well, to the best of their ability. That's an amazing statement of what they were willing to shoulder. Because we often talk about the privilege of the Levites and the privileges of the Kohanim, and we treat it as though it's not really fair that birth should matter so much and that they should get this standing. But a midrash like this really helps us understand that what they took on were debts that they hadn't made. But they did it because it was for the benefit of the nation. And that was their choice, in a sense. That they were willing to step up, the same way that Jacob was willing to step up to take away from Esau what Esau clearly did not value, in order that it would be done right. So too the Levites were willing to step into that breach and do what was necessary for the community, even though it meant their own cows and their own future inheritance materially was going to go away.
Did they not already know at this time that they would not inherit land in Israel?
The land allotments have not been announced yet.
So they didn't know that they wouldn't get it.
It comes back to a much bigger question of the directionality of Torah. That is to say, was all of Torah known at all the time, or was it revealed at different stages during the wilderness journey?
Okay.
Because remember, at this point, at least in the minds of the average person, if they haven't been reading ahead, they think they're going to be in Israel in a few weeks. This is not going to be 40 years of wandering. They've been at Mount Sinai for a couple years. That's it. They left Egypt. They went to Mount Sinai. They got the Torah. They built the Mishkan. They organized themselves. They did a census to march to Israel. And then, as we all know, it's all going to go sour. But right now, the expectation is pretty soon we're going to be in Israel and we're going to be setting up our farms and getting everything going.
Are the Levites more self-sacrificing and courageous than the Kohanim?
Well, the Kohen, remember, are part of the Levites. Or do you mean, are they even more because they get less?
Yes.
At least the Kohen gets higher status.
Yeah.
And the poor Levites are caught in the middle.
Right.
They don't get the benefits
But
of the
they're
regular.
giving up so much of their own personal
In a way, you could say that.
wealth, if you want to call the cattle part of their wealth.
They are stepping into a position that isn't as elevated as the actual Kohens,
Right.
but is more limited than the regular Israelites.
Yes.
So you're right. In some ways, they get the worst bargain, but in some ways, they also get
They're elevated in the eyes
Right.
of God.
and they get to serve in a way that others don't.
Yeah.
So it depends on how you value that, which is why the story of Jacob and Esau was so important. Esau wanted food, Jacob wanted to serve God. And the way you value those two things, for someone who doesn't want to serve God, a bowl of soup is plenty. You don't need to pay me any more than that. And for somebody who wants to serve God, any price would be okay.
But the Levites, when they get to Israel, their function
Mhm.
is to take care of the temple.
Right.
And the priests.
Right?
And they are supported
Correct.
by the rest of the Israelites.
And depending upon your feeling of being dependent upon others, that may be either a good thing or a bad thing.
Exactly.
Because some people don't mind going, I really hope that when the tithes come this year, I have enough food. And other people say, well, at least I don't have to be a farmer and I can just live off the tithes.
Yes, and when an animal is sacrificed, they're the ones that get to eat that animal.
Sometimes. The
So-
Kohanes get
right.
the lion's share, but
Right.
yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's not exactly an unmitigated blessing, but it is something they were willing to do. Let's go ahead and finish the text. So we are they were.
They were great in the world and arose and offered sacrifices before the calf.
The firstborn.
God said, let the firstborn, oh wait.
Yeah, that's okay. Said God. Yeah, let the firstborn.
Okay, I thought I read that already. God, let the firstborn be dismissed and let the sons of Levi be installed. Now, the firstborn had incurred the penalty of destruction. So God said, let the sons of Levi come and redeem them. For this reason, you find the Levites redeeming the firstborn. Hence, it is written, take the Levites and the cattle of the Levites instead of their cattle. For the priests and the Levites were exempt from the duty of redeeming the firstborn, whether firstborn of man or firstling of the ass, which is likened to the firstborn of man. Since it is written, however, the firstborn of man you will surely redeem, and the firstling of unclean beasts will you redeem.
Meaning
Numbers.
animals that you don't use in the sacrifice, which like a donkey. You don't sacrifice donkeys on the altar. And both man and donkeys are mentioned in the same verse, so they're kind of similar.
Number 18, verse 15. But not the firstborn of the clean beasts, which are holy. What is the meaning of, and the Levites shall be mine? I am the Lord. Chapter 3, verse 13. I am the trustworthy to grant them good recompense for as much as they have sanctified my name in connection with the calf.
All right, so
And
that's Bamidbar Rabbah, the text that this comes from. It's okay. So there's a lot going on in this last paragraph. Let's take the last part first because it's a little bit easier to get our head around. So what the Midrash is finally saying is that the Levites can trust that God will make good on paying them back for what they have chosen to do. By taking this role on, this responsibility on, God's got them, right? They are mine, and if you're God's, God will make sure that you are taken care of. That's what he means by recompense. You'll be paid back properly. Doesn't necessarily mean in this world, but it means in all the account books imaginable. But notice also this introduction in the middle. The Levites stepped in to replace the firstborn after the golden calf. The penalty for what the firstborns had done when they sacrificed to the golden calf should have been, but because the Levites were willing to step in, God was willing to say, all right, their sacrifice, what they're choosing to do, I will take that as a redemption of you. I will take that as clearing off this issue. Right? They are making up for your big mistake. And I'm okay with that. Which is why, in perpetuity, we keep that memory alive. We still feel that the firstborns need to have that redemption, that they should have lived up to the ideal in the past. The golden calf ruined that, so the Levites are now forced to do the job instead of them. And we have to go to the Levites and say, thank you for taking this job that should have been mine had not our ancestors all messed up so royally. And so the life cycle thing got erased. So the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn, continues to this day as a reminder of this balance within our community of how we allocate the different responsibilities and privileges and how we thank one another for stepping in and helping when we need it. Good?
Yeah, interesting.
There's another concept that I learned, I don't know how it fits in with all this, is that the firstborn or the firstling is dedicated to God
Yes,
as a sacrifice. And you don't want to dedicate your child, so you're buying him back.
exactly. So it parallels this perfectly fine. So when the Torah talks about this, it talks about the firstborn of everything belongs to God, right? It is God's property. And as we all know, the use of God's property for anything other than a sacrifice is wrong. It's considered stealing from the temple. When it comes to firstborn people, well, that would be a problem. And so we have to purchase them back. We have to redeem them as though they were a sacrifice directed to the temple. And we purchase them back to allow them to not end up on the altar. Not that they could ever be allowed on the altar, of course, but it gives them that redemption, and it acknowledges them as belonging to God in a sacrificial sense. Whereas this is talking about their privileges, that's talking about their fate, if you will.
So my question is, it's totally different than his question.
That's okay.
But my question is, so God was preparing for a backup, knowing that the Kohanim were going to worship the golden calf.
You mean the firstborn? We're going to do
the firstborn. So he had a backup plan.
Well, I mean, of course, God knows what direction everything's going. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of being God.
I'm going to make these another.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
I
Okay.
always got confused with the accountants because I was thinking money, but I know it had nothing to do with money.
No, it's just a parable to help make it clear by using something that we might be able to relate to.
Sorry for my poor reading.